Hey, friendo, Steve here.
And Larson.
And welcome back to Going In Raw, Dark Side of the Ring, Season 1 Montreal Screwjob review. We told you guys we'd be reviewing Season 1, and we're doing it every single week. Today is Saturday, and so Monday, the 8th of June, our friendo Black Lives Matter benefit for the Bail Project is going down. Friendo Fest 2. It's a 3-hour extravaganza live at twitch.tv/Steven Larson. We're trying to get to $10,000 for the Bail Project, and the link is in the description right now. Larson, when we get to $10,000, not if, but when, what are you going to do, brother?
I'm going to put down these pencils I had in my hand for some reason earlier while you were talking. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Nervous energy, man.
Okay.
And then, since we're about a third of the way there right now, I'll do a third of it.
Oh,
I'm going to close that.
Let's close that gap. Let's get to $10,000.
At
Larson,
$10,000.
will Too Sweet me? And once the COVID's done with and we can go back to wrestling shows, you run into us at a wrestling show, ask Larson for a Too Sweet, and he will oblige.
Yes,
but we got to get to 10,000.
The no too sweeting policy will be a thing of the past.
Kaput.
If we get to $10,000.
You're burying the gimmick.
I got someone take these pencils away from me. I can't stop all this nervous energy I have in me right now.
Whoa. Well, let's channel it into a wonderful review today, okay?
We could try. Yes,
anyways, the link for the donation is in the description below us. So what you can, it'd be appreciated when we get to 10,000.
Yes.
It'll be a pretty special thing, man. So this was the Montreal Screwjob episode. And this is actually the one I think that I had already seen, but I watched it again this morning. Mm-hmm. And I think it's we already knew. I mean, given that, Wrestling with Shadows, we had both seen that multiple times.
Yeah.
We had already, had probably seen multiple shoot interviews with multiple wrestlers about this. The Montreal Screwjob is one of the most overanalyzed events in wrestling history. Still, I really love that they really did sort of bring some new stuff to the table. I really liked how they presented the story of the Montreal Screwjob.
Agreed. And coming out of this when it originally aired, because this is one of I think this is the first one we both watched.
Mm-hmm.
Seemingly the newest detail that either had been not reported or underreported was Jim Cornette's involvement in the idea of the screw job itself. So kind of the centerpiece of this whole thing is it's Cornette, it's Vince Russo having a meeting with Vince at Vince's home. And they're just going over ideas of how to get the title off Brett, because by this point, the match has been made at Survivor Series, Shawn and Brett. Brett said not dropping the belt to Shawn because he had reasonable creative control for the last 60 days of his deal for his time in WWE. And after he went up to Shawn on the lead up to this match saying, hey, because they'd already had a fight earlier that year. Hey, we're in the ring, going to protect you. I'll be professional, and I'll put you over. And according to Brett, Shawn's response was, well, thanks. I wouldn't do the same thing for you.
Okay, let me ask you something real quick. Now, I never did watch because it seemed too awkward, and I can't stand it.
Oh, the Rivals documentary?
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched that.
Did Shawn Michaels ever corroborate that story that Brett told? Because it would seem like such a weird thing after having worked with a person that long for Brett to cold go up to Shawn. And granted, they had a fight and everything, but hey, I just want to let you know I will protect you in the ring. Like, that's such a weird thing to just say cold.
I understand. I don't remember it being brought up. At the same time you say that, we know that Hogan apparently went up to the Undertaker before their match at Survivor Series 91 and asked him, be sure not to hurt me.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I
it's a conversation that could be had, I guess, huh?
I don't think it's a conversation that maybe happens with a great regularity, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a conversation that doesn't happen from time to time.
I just don't remember seeing Shawn's take on how that fight started.
I don't remember if it was brought up. It's been a while since I've seen it.
Yeah.
Going back to the centerpiece of this thing was Cornette, Russo, Vince, just tossing ideas back and forth, and they're kind of at an impasse. They don't know what to do, and Cornette brings up the original Montreal Screwjob, a match between Ed Lewis, Henri Deglon in Montreal, 1931, I believe. Yeah. Where in the locker room, he tells the story a little different than how because we featured that incident in 110 for the Win during the first season.
Yeah.
And Jim Cornette explains it slightly differently than how I read about it. But the roundabout is either DeGlon bit himself or his trainer bit him in the armpit or under his arm. And between falls, then when the match resumed, he put Lewis in a hold. And then when he emerged from that hold, he had a bite mark and he was bleeding. The ref DQ'd Ed Lewis, awarded the title to Henri DeGlon. And according to Cornette, he brought this up and said, just do the same thing. Have Shawn put Brett in the sharpshooter. Have the ref call for the bell. There you go. You get the belt off Brett.
And when you think about the possible like your safeguard for that is, well, Brett's not going to bitch about that because he's not. What is he going to do? Go to the newspapers and tell them that wrestling is fake? That's not going to happen. So it's a clean way out.
Yeah, that's how Cornette pitched it, and then according to him, Vince's response was,
yeah, like okay, let's get out of the clouds and get back to reality.
Yeah. And then Cornette says, sure enough, come Survivor Series '97, he's sitting in front of the monitors watching the match, and it's going down more or less exactly like how he pitched it.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and then he ran away. Yeah. And then, of course, the crux of this centerpiece is Vince Russo then trying to claim credit for the entire affair himself. He does several things here that, in my opinion, in my study of the human condition over the past 41 years, would indicate that he is lying through his teeth.
Yeah.
The one thing that he said that just screams liar to me, in my own personal opinion, I'm not saying that the man is dishonest. I'm not saying he's a liar. I feel like he's probably lying. So, is when he said, because they bring up Jim Cornette says that he pitched it this way in a very specific manner. Jim Cornette pitches this, and the fact that he's able to reference, because we reviewed this a little bit in one of our shows, like when it first came out.
Yeah, we've discussed it. Yeah.
Just not on its own thing. The fact that he was able to reference history and why this was his idea was so much more legitimate. It's like, oh, he's a historian. We know that. He says you can learn so much more about today's wrestling by looking at history, at these magazines and books, than you can talking to wrestlers today, because history repeats itself. He takes us through the process of coming up with this. That's why I believe Cornette here. Mm-hmm. Russo, when asked, well, did you remember Cornette saying this? He says, well, maybe unless he said it while I was in the bathroom, that never happened in front of me. And liars typically give themselves an out, so that like, oh, well, maybe it happened while I was in the bathroom, but otherwise it didn't. Mm-hmm. That's what liars usually do. They give themselves that little amount of wiggle room because they know they're lying. So that was one thing that I caught with Vince Russo. It's like, oh, you do that thing that liars do. I don't believe him for a second that he came up with a screw job. And so, yeah, I mean, I think clearly this is, and I do think, you mentioned this at the jump, I do think this is the first time that it was that Cornette publicly admitted this, because I do remember a tweet from Meltzer in response to a fan, because Meltzer evidently has known this for since back then, and he has never revealed it. And a fan asks after this aired the first originally, hey, is this the guy that you knew it was? And he said yes. So he confirmed that this is what he understood was the truth as well. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. One thing that I disagree with the Wrestling Observer himself, he has said also that he feels that the Russo versus Cornette aspect of this episode detracted from, because he felt they focused on it too much. And I disagree completely. He also said that he didn't like the bit with Scott Hall claiming it was a work. And I thought that was brilliant, because there are so many people who do think that that was a conspiracy, that it was a work. And they used the Scott Hall bit to then talk to Cornette to Pritchard to Russo to say, no, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
This was real.
Yeah, totally. One aspect they didn't really get into that I recall, at least in a detail in Dark Side of the Ring, that Meltzer has talked about in great detail was kind of the myth of the screw job is that Brett signed with WCW after getting out of his WWE contract, and the idea seemingly that he could show up the next day on Nitro with the title, and that's why Vince had to get the belt off him at that time, which wasn't actually the case. In fact, I believe my understanding, I don't remember the exact point when his contract was up. However, my understanding is that Bischoff was going to allow Brett more time, like another month. So if necessary, he could drop the title at the following pay-per-view.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that isn't exactly covered in great detail in Dark Side. That's one thing prior to Meltzer talking about it extensively following the airing of the episode initially. One aspect of the story that kind of gets lost in the whole mythology of the Montreal Screwjob is that this, in a lot of ways, was kind of an avoidable situation.
It seemed like it was. Yeah, even Undertaker just recently, and I didn't watch it myself, but from what I understand, he thought that he could have been used as a way out for this situation as well. I think my response to that, one line that Pritchard had in this, sort of, since we first watched, because when this aired, was it a year ago or 2 years ago? How long was it between seasons?
I don't know exactly. I'll look that up. Carry on. I'll look it up.
So the one thing that we have both come to understand about the WWE and how Vince operates is there isn't a whole lot of planning that goes on there. And this is not... Oh, go ahead.
The Montreal Screwjob episode debuted April 17th, 2019, so a little bit more than a year ago.
Okay. I mean, I think especially, the pandemic has sort of shined a light on, how WWE plans things. It's obvious that they're not, a lot of this stuff is sort of on the fly. And one line that Pritchard had just sort of resonated more with me. And he said, we didn't worry about this because we knew Brett was such a professional. Now, looking at it in hindsight, it's like, okay, why wasn't there more of a sense of urgency about this situation? And when you look at it through the lens of that line that Pritchard had, when you think about being in that situation, they just didn't worry about it because these things just work themselves out. Yeah. So it seems like this screw job thing just came down to the wire, Yeah. It's like Cornette pitches it and Vince is like, well, that's just silly. That's just, you've got a wild imagination there, Cornette. Yeah. And then, but when it comes time for the big day, it's like, oh God, he is not budging on this. This is usually figured out by now. Let's just screw him out of the title.
Yeah. Yeah. And I obviously they didn't have Vince, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Gerald Briscoe on for interviews, obviously. So I don't know if we'll ever really know, at least from their perspective, whether they operated primarily with the idea, well, this will work itself out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And for how long leading up to Survivor Series did they have the screw job idea kind of in their back pocket as plan B? I mean, even on, it's photographed in Wrestling with Shadows and shown in part here, where before the show, Brett goes to Vince's office and they're still talking about the finish of the match.
Right.
The day of.
Yeah.
It's still working it out.
The day
and
of.
The idea was they're going to end in a wonky finish, double DQ, something like that. And then Brett was going to hand over the title the following day on Raw. And then, even with that understanding, Brett seemed very aware of the fact that something screwy could happen, because there's this great story where Earl Hebner's getting on the plane to fly to Montreal for Survivor Series, and the flight attendant comes up to him and says, "Hey, you've been bumped up to first class," and he's confused, and apparently Brett, upgraded him, so he goes and sits next to Brett, and Brett says, "Hey, don't screw me over," because he and Hebner apparently were close. Hebner used to work most, if not all, of Brett's matches. And Earl's like, "No, I won't." And it was a situation for him where Briscoe went up to him seemingly, not very long before that match, and told them what was going to happen, and more or less said, if you want to keep your job, you have to do this.
Yeah. So I remember this bit so this is an article on ESPN.com written by Tim Fioravanti. And I think it was probably on the anniversary, November 8th, 2019. So this is less than a year ago. He wrote about this. And so this was... okay, so this is from Shawn Michaels' perspective, which he was not interviewed for this Dark Side of the Ring.
All right, yeah.
So he talks about a phone call that happened. He says, and then, of course, was an infamous phone call between myself and Triple H and Vince. He says, I want to say it was just the week before. Now, of course, you and I both are very aware that memories are a tricky thing. So he says, there was certainly no talk of it for me one way or another until that phone call the week before Survivor Series. And I'm pretty sure that's the one where Hunter says, everybody's just being quiet. I forget where I read that bit. Oh, here we go.
Yeah,
honestly, the thing that I recall, wait, let's see here. Where I thought it was Hunter that said.
Yeah, my memory is like something like, he's not going to do business, just take the title off him or something like
everybody was quiet, and then Hunter's at the end, and Triple H just piped up with that. So I wonder, you can sort of just piece it together, right? Vince is talking to Cornette and Russo. Cornette throws out, well, why don't we just screw him? And Vince is like, And then down the line, a couple days, let's say, he's on the phone and this conversation happens. And then Triple H says, let's screw him out of the title. I wonder if those two pieces together maybe convinced Vince, okay, this might be a real option come the day of.
Yeah, or at least had the idea in his head, well, if Brett says no,
yeah.
If Vince felt like his hands was forced, then
everybody else seems to think this is a good idea, even though I think it's in the clouds. Maybe I need to reconsider it. So, so you can sort of piece things together. The telling of the fight between Brett and Shawn and the recreation of fake Shawn coming in with a clump of hair, slamming it down, saying this is an unsafe work environment. Wrestling is so hilarious. It's so funny that would have happened. A couple little bits.
Of course, they told the story of Brett knocking out Vince afterwards.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
From Brett's perspectives, where he's about to go in the shower. Vince comes in.
I came out naked.
And he's like, hey, we need to talk. And Brett more or less said, all right, well, here's the thing. I'm going to go take a shower. If you're still here when I come back, I'm going to knock you out.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And so Brett goes, he takes his time, takes a shower, comes out. Vince is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And all the while, like, Shawn is apparently like in one side of the dressing room, just like, if not in tears, on the verge of.
Yeah.
And so Vince is talking, Brett's getting dressed, and then as Brett puts it, he finishes tying his shoes, stands up, they lock up, uppercut to Vince, he hits the floor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, of course, there's always that shot in Wrestling with Shadows of Vince emerging from the locker room, just limping.
In a daze.
With a black eye starting to form already.
A couple of little things that I thought were hilarious when they were going back and forth with Russo and Cornette. When Russo was talking about Jim Cornette's philosophies on wrestling, and he says, I'll never forget, one day he said something like, if a guy comes out of a box, he'll be instantly over. And I'm like, what is this, 1970? This was 1996, and you see a shot of like Abdullah the Butcher coming out of a box. And I was like, is that what he was talking about? Like, because to his credit, that's something I believe that Vince Russo actually heard come out of Jim Cornette's mouth, and I'm really curious about context there.
Yeah, me too.
What does he mean by a guy comes out of a box, he'll be over instantly?
Yeah, I want to know that too.
I loved, once again, Scott Hall. I
want to know the context, and I want to know what evidence Cornette has in his back pocket to support that hypothesis.
Because I'm sure he'd be able to convince me. It's so sad.
He'll go back to 1935, and somebody came out of a box, and the crowd went crazy for it.
Yeah,
maybe because it was the first time it ever happened.
I have no idea.
Anyway, sorry, continue.
No clue.
Yeah, I don't know. No clue.
Scott Hall, once again, I could watch him talk forever. He is so good. I love when he talks about pro wrestling. I love when he talks about anything. But his line about we're not in pro wrestling to make friends. You want to go to dinner with me? No. You want to wrestle me? Oh, okay. Doesn't want to go to dinner with you, but he does want to wrestle you. That's Scott Hall. And then when they had him live reacting, I want to see the entire tape of him live reacting to the entire match.
I know.
Oh, look. Oh, it's so humiliating. He's being put in his own move.
Now, do you believe Scott Hall when he says that he and Shawn have never had a conversation?
No. And I actually think that there might have been some sort of conversation between him and the producers about playing up his thoughts about it being a work, because I don't think that I believe Scott Hall thinks it's a work. I think he was there to fill that role of
entirely possible.
The conspiracy theorist made, given a voice, basically.
Yeah.
That wouldn't shock me, because it's not that big of a deal to say I think it was a work. And even he's giving the worst evidence too. He's like, oh, see, look at Brett's face right there. He doesn't look that shocked.
Or no, the worst bit of evidence is Vince would never let something happen to his company that he didn't know was going to happen.
Right?
You think he'd let Brett do the WCW thing if he didn't know?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm sure the cameraman would zoom right into a loogie on his face. I'm like, no, he probably would. The TV people didn't know what was going on. They're there to capture the action.
Yep, that's part of their job, especially as a wrestling production crew, is to capture things that may not be scripted. They might not expect to happen.
Another hilarious little detail that I totally missed and didn't process the first time around: Jim Cornette frames his death threats.
Yeah.
How weird is that?
Or at least the ones he finds the most interesting.
I guess so. Yeah. Oh, I was like, wait a second. Why is he looking at that in a frame on his wall and it's a death threat? That is hilarious. So yeah, no, I actually thought this was a really, really well done episode. This was sort of, especially given that this is only the second one that aired. The guy that they got to do, at the very least, in the mannerisms of Bret Hart for the recreation was really good. Some of the mannerisms of Shawn Michaels was really good. The guy they got to play, Jim Cornette, didn't look a lick like him. So there's still, Darkseid is still trying to figure out at this point how much out of focus, get it a little bit more out of focus. But the Bret stuff, I thought when he did they got the guy doing this thing, I thought was really, really good. I was like, oh, that's a good
when NWO Shawn Michaels put NWO Bret Hart in the sharpshooter in the recreation part, I thought, in terms of the movements and everything, was pretty much spot on.
It was good, yeah. I thought they did a good job with that. Do we know what's up next week?
Next week is the killing of Bruiser Brody. I have seen this one.
I have not.
It's really good. It's riveting. It's harrowing. It's kind of feel like when the show really found its voice and its fullest extent.
Okay, awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing that and looking forward to having the Friendos join us when we do. The link in the description to the Friendo Black Lives Matter benefit for the Bail Project is down below in the description. You see, I'm able to get the entire thing out in one go. So I think
good.
Okay.
Good.
Get to $10,000. Larson will too sweet you. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We appreciate it. Till next time. We'll talk to you later.
Goodbye.